I've always said that visuals are the first thing you see. The foundation of your mental perception of a given universe.
I am UESC.
The first visuals people saw of Marathon were bold, sharp, and mysterious. But then during last year's alpha, in-game, there was something in the way. It lacked that pop, that thing that grabbed you. But a year later, things are different. Or are they? With public perception flipped from lukewarm at best to increasingly very positive, the graphical style seems completely overhauled, and yet, look closely, very little has changed. How this was done, through some new tricks and a few old ones, is interesting. But more important is why turning this game's visuals around is fundamental to its future. So, a couple weeks ago, I was at Bungie Studios, playing at that time the most recent version of the game with some other content creators you may have seen. And yes, this video is in fact sponsored by Bungie, but hold on. What this video won't be is, oh, here's my thoughts, go play the game during the preview week with the link in my description, and then throw some gameplay on screen and call it a day. Partially because those kinds of videos have already been done better than I could do them, you may have seen them, but more so because in the heat of combat, there are a ton of little details you easily miss, small elements of design with huge implications for how different the game feels now. On this channel, I'm lucky enough to have the connections and the huge amount of footage sitting on ice to talk about the art side of things a bit deeper. And well, in this game, art matters a lot more than usual. So Marathon runs on some kind of old technology. Bungie's proprietary Tiger engine is actually a heavily modified iteration on Blam, the engine that they developed way back in 1997 for Halo CE. Obviously through the years it's become entirely its own thing, but every so often you can feel that Bungie DNA peeking through quite obviously. Point is, Tiger has its unique quirks, but it can look basically like anything. When new Marathon was first being developed, it had a high contrast, heavily detailed and textured style. High fidelity realism was the visual standard. And as the game shifted in scope very early on, they moved away from pure realism to this strict graphic design influenced form language, geometric shapes, and two-dimensional decals. They dubbed this style graphic realism. Again, this was an art style philosophy. It could be applied to anything, transferred to any medium. And when great artists get inspired, well, amazing art gets made.
I met a traveler from an antique land who said,
The Alberto Mielgo directed animated short shown alongside the initial gameplay reveal a year ago was almost universally praised. Even people hating on Marathon the game's visuals at that time couldn't help but see the brilliance in this, the immersion and potential of this world. But wait, it's the same, right? The art style did not change. So why did people love one interpretation so much, yet feel the actual in-game treatment had utterly failed to sell that exact same world? Well, when developing graphic realism, an early inspiration was American painter Bernie Fuchs. So what do you notice about this guy's work? What gives these flattened, two-dimensional color block renderings such a breathing sense of life? It's light. Light makes all the difference. But we're getting a bit too apples to oranges here, so let me give you a more objective, iterative example of what I'm talking about. Here we've got a starting point. We have the tenets of graphic realist design, the proportions, the implied functionality through 2D decals, even the stark color. But this is literally an albedo map layer in Blender. It's the raw textures without any lighting at all. It's so obviously flat. That's better. Now we've got depth, three-dimensionality, differentiation between matte and gloss texture. We get light bouncing off of one object onto others. But it's a bit 3D model looking, right? The light and color don't really feel like they're coming from anywhere specific. Now we're getting somewhere. Light feels like it's behaving sensically, coming from a real source, with dynamic range as a camera would see it. But I feel we've lost some of that detail, that pop. And there's that final polish that we needed. Atmospheric texture washes the natural light into this eerie radiance. Materials pick up light sources and begin to glow themselves. Now this is a scene. Now I'm there. The point of this was all to say that little changes in light treatment and color completely shift the tone. And creative decisions to do this were made because of changes in creative direction. Or at least they kind of were. See, the negative attention the alpha got, some of it was due to the simple, incomplete nature of that build, work-in-progress animations imposing broken lighting systems, a lack of polish overall. And these complaints and those about the game's creative choices became impossibly intertwined. Many couldn't place exactly why, but the game just felt gamey. It felt unserious. It advertised a story world that directly clashed with its visual presentation. Some of these sweeping improvements that we can see now would have happened anyway in the final phase of polish, but many were improved through the lens of a pointedly different visual spirit. With a new creative director stepping into place, an overarching sense of darkness became a tenet, not in lack of light, but in narrative tone. It actually brought the game visually in a way back to kind of the vibe those early concepts had. This true sense of almost cosmic horror, this creepiness over everything, accentuated through slight changes in color range, in texture, and of course, lighting. While graphic realism has always been the art style and was held fast as the game shifted tonally, one major part of it lost the battle: the simplified cell-style shading. In my opinion, Marathon's art style shone brightest when its artifice felt tangible. Eerily flat 3D printed textures atop tactile sand or under layers of mud or foliage, the strangeness of impossibly clean, perfect shapes or objects you felt you could reach out and touch. By removing that extra layer of artifice that cell shading provided, the world's artificiality immediately feels uncanny in all the right ways. Another prior tenet was limited texture, gloss or matte, nothing else, and this was largely upheld, except for in very important places. As this animated short became the game's North Star for visual direction over late 2025, one thing stood out about it: its texture, but in certain places, its lack thereof. While the floors are covered in scuffs and dust, walls are immaculate. Some materials are torn, weathered, and others feel like they were printed minutes ago. In-game, the area is covered in grass, vines, oil slick and corrosion, broken glass, graffiti. They stand out against objects with this impossible neoprene flatness. Micro details were brought in where there weren't any before, like threading and texture on runners' hands, the tactile bumps and sheen of weapon parts. They sort of fool your eyes into this impression of tactility down to a microscopic level. Next to these, anything with a lack of texture becomes a texture itself. And suddenly, through this back and forth, the entire world begins to breathe. But who cares? Why does any of this matter to the game underneath? You might think that an art director, well, they just do the art. They don't have any say on whether the game is fun or not. Well, I actually kind of completely disagree. Specifically in the case of this genre. After killing the cel-shaded style, specialists in the Tiger engine came in, tweaking it to get light acting how it ought to act based on physics, but pushed further into that sort of realm of cinematic expressionism. Bloom is cranked up to 11. Any reflective surface now glows with this wash of colored light. Man, I think it's really just beautiful. And it kind of reminds me of something. Now, I don't believe that Bungie were actually in any way thinking about ODST, but subconsciously, I think they might have accidentally come to similar conclusions. See, a game's visual direction and art style dictate the way that we approach its world and vice versa. ODST ran on the exact same version of the Blam engine that Halo 3 ran on, and yet they look, in many cases, completely different. And that's because the way that you, the player, needed to approach ODST was an utter departure from how you'd approached every prior Halo game. You were no longer a superhuman on a galaxy-trotting space opera. You were a human soldier with a submachine gun stranded alone on the rain-soaked city streets of Earth. And from just looking at the art style, you can immediately tell that difference. Visual immersion in Tau Ceti's living world did not come across as a major concern in how Marathon was presented at reveal, and I think that players subconsciously felt how contradictory that was, given its supposed tone and narrative. Spaces felt artificially crafted from a gameplay-first perspective. And in this genre, the extraction shooter, immersion is immensely important. Why? Because of how you engage with the world. Every lasting successful game in this genre has a world that feels real, alive, and intensely satisfying to just exist in. These are places that feel like they exist, not just platforms to farm clips. Every motion, every action is tactile and satisfying because just doing things, being there, moving through a space and interacting with it, unlike an arena PvP game or a battle royale or a single-player story, that's the majority of your time spent in-game. The intensity of the cool moments comes specifically from the tension of the quiet moments that brought you to them. And in the same way that ODST shifted its visual direction, Marathon's world now truly feels like it reflects how you're meant to interact with it. As a scavenger, a mercenary who's in over their head, who isn't supposed to be there, but wants to explore a bit further and push the envelope anyway. As an art director, you're never going to quite hit the perfection that key art or promotional material has, and this is a problem that's existed as long as video games have. But closing that gap should always be the goal. Games are a fantasy, and how well the art direction dictates the intended fantasy, that's the baseline of our experience of it. It's what can take an area from a nothing block of assets to a point of interest we're magnetically drawn towards. One of my biggest complaints about the game's visuals right now is actually kind of a compliment at the same time, and it has to do with the UI. You have these beautiful, diegetic elements, animations, sounds, communicating pertinent information in a completely immersive way, just for a redundant UI element to be placed directly on top of it. Now, I know that I'm not a game or UX designer. People making this stuff have their reasons, and specific people at Bungie in charge of this stuff have heard my feedback about it 10 times over. But if I could encapsulate simply why Marathon looks and feels so much better now than it did a year ago, it's the places where the world becomes narrative, through a choice in this texture of material, that color of lighting, without having to outright tell you. The way a game looks actually changes how you approach it at a fundamental level. And extraction shooters are about wanting to approach danger with curiosity. Most games need to be played to get what they're about, but it doesn't have to be that way. Raw moments that feel cinematic, that seem scripted but aren't, that sells a universe better than any gameplay montage or hype trailer ever could. I don't know, I'm just saying. When I hear the thud of mortars, see rounds soaring in and flares popping overhead signaling an incoming heat cascade, I want to experience that in all its rawness. 'Cause then, I'm there. My main concern with Marathon really was that the art styles stand on its own, that I can look at any given screenshot and go, damn, I want to be there. At one point I felt that it just had the potential to do that, but now, well, because reflecting the benchmarks of other interpretations of the art style is a good start, but being filled with areas, experiences that are cooler than anything in those other pieces, that's when you start to finally close that impossible gap between cover art and reality. I guess the whole point of this is to say this was not an accident, and was not the result of one thing. The game got more polished, sure, technology was pushed farther, creative direction was tweaked with concentrated purpose in ways that aligned gameplay and aesthetics and narrative, but really? The game works now because all these things are lining up. And most satisfyingly, not only was the original vision upheld, it was met with significantly more fidelity and strength than if the road to get here wasn't as rocky as it was. Visuals are the first thing that you see. Without them selling the world, it would have been that much more of an uphill battle. But from the beginning, I could always imagine the potential. And now I'm starting to see it with my own eyes. I'm Riloe, and I like to talk about stuff that I think is cool. Don't take my word for how the game looks or feels or plays. Please do actually use my link to check out Marathon during the open server test that they're doing right now. Completely free, no pre-order, no nothing. See how you feel about the game yourself, and I highly suggest that you turn the HUD off for a bit if you do. Of course, thank you to Bungie for sponsoring this video and for bringing me out to finally see that sniper prop in person, even if I didn't get to touch it. And a huge thanks to Strider, who painstakingly put up with my notes in order to create the gorgeous custom renders that you saw in the video today. Please go support him on whatever platforms he's on. He's one of the artists that I've seen best capture a really creative interpretation of classic 90s Marathon in the modern art style, so seriously go give him some love. If you enjoyed this kind of video and you're new here, subscribe for more, of course, and I will see you very soon. Cheers.